It's on.
If you will, go ahead and start finding your seats, please. If you need a handout for the class, raise your hand. You young men, grab some of the handouts and spread them out with the hands, please. All right, so as we said, this is a little bit unusual circumstances, but let's engage. Do raise your hands and allow the young men to bring you the mic. The acoustics in this room are a little bit challenging, but we have good technology that helps us, so raise your hand, let the mic come to you, and then engage, with your questions or comments, that sort of thing. So, David?
All right. Well, when we arrived, we didn't know anybody here, and now we do, and we've made some connections. There's some folks who spent time in Akron, and some Browns fans. So that's I know Lee just gave me a look, but this morning I wanted to spend some time talking about the wisdom literature in me, and there are some points that I would like to have your participation as we think about this topic for the class period this morning. So I appreciate your cooperation. I guess for some of you, this might be your opportunity to just mess it all up for me. But I enjoy teaching a class. I was excited at the thought of being able to teach in a classroom and not in a big auditorium, but I understand the logistics of things are a little different today than what is typical. So we'll find out who did their homework. The wisdom literature, as I point out in the handout, has been cherished by God's people for a very long time. And when you study it can be a bit intimidating. Some of the language, some of the expressions and illustrations that are used, well, they came out of the ancient world. A world very different than ours, and so that presents some challenges perhaps in understanding some of the flow of thought. But the wisdom literature is valid, it is timeless, and it is integral to the life of a Christian, of course, but more fundamentally, what this body of work is expressing to us is how we can be human. What does it mean to be human? Of course, Genesis answers that question for us. What makes humans different from everything else that God made is that we were endowed with His image. We are His image bearers in the earth, designed to exercise stewardship. He gives us a mandate to use the world to our benefit and to His glory. And that's deeply challenging, and as you see in Genesis, things went awry. But the wisdom literature gets into how all of that is to be accomplished. To begin with, biblical wisdom literature is generally considered the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. Now, if you Google the wisdom literature of the Bible, that's what's going to come up. And you may include a couple other books as well. Sometimes Psalms gets put into that. Other times, the Song of Solomon. Of course, Solomon is the one who writes much of the wisdom literature. But this gives you a clear idea of specifically the books that we're talking about when we refer to wisdom literature. This morning, we're going to talk about this in some broad framework, and but also try to give some focus to Proverbs. Proverbs is very important in explaining to us how we are to properly reflect the glory of God. So hopefully we'll talk about some things that you've not considered before, and hopefully by the end of this class, you'll want to go home and read Proverbs. That's my goal. So to begin with, I have this question, just simply, what's the purpose of this body of work? I mean, if you think of Proverbs, what's the point? Pardon? To impart wisdom, all right. What else? It's about godly living. Yes, ma'am. To give guidance. Who is it designed to give guidance to? Okay, the son, the youth. Yes, Proverbs is written from the standpoint of a father to a son. So, as I've taught younger people, you all need to be reading Proverbs. It is a book of the Bible that is written for you. Young people often, just that point in life, you're trying to find your way in the world and understand your place. Well, even in the Bible, accounted for your place in life. And young people especially should be reading Proverbs and probably then asking some questions along the way. I was a child once, but now I'm the father. I have 2 sons. And I would tell fathers, we need to be reading Proverbs so we can understand what we need to be teaching to our children. And so regardless of what end of the spectrum you're on, Proverbs is valid. Proverbs is relevant from the father or the son. Any other thoughts you have about the purpose? Yes, ma'am. Ah, very good, very good. It tells you what you should do, and it tells you what you should not do. When I was in college, I have a degree in education, and there was a heavy emphasis at the time about having a positive approach in the classroom. So if you were going to you didn't set rules in a classroom. Just the word rule was bad. You needed to set expectations. And in setting expectations, don't tell them what not to do, tell them what to do. And I can remember hearing that and thinking, well, that's interesting, but that's not the way the Bible does it. You see, there is, yes, absolutely, we need to set expectations. We need to know what we are supposed to do. But we also need to be warned about what to avoid. And so there needs to be a balance between the two. And Proverbs does that. And not just Proverbs, of course. There are any number of places in the Bible where you see that, the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. There is a negative and there is a positive, and they're brought together in one. Anything else about the value of it? Yes, William.
Yes, Solomon, he's speaking from experience.
Yes.
So wisdom from experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's powerful.
Wisdom from experience. Yes, that's powerful. Absolutely. And that's sort of the challenge to youth is inexperience. Now, there's nothing wrong with being inexperienced when you're young. That's just reality. It's the way it is. We were talking yesterday, and I said, as I've gotten older, I sort of know what I want. Those of you who are older and you have experience, you know what you want. When you're young, when you're a teenager, when you're in your 20s, you don't have a gut. You don't have an instinct. You think you do, but you don't know what you want, and you can be all over the place. Well, how do you compensate for that? The challenge to youth is you go from one thing to the other. You think of Paul talking about you don't want to be like children in Ephesians 4. You don't want to be like children, pushed one direction to the other, tossed like the waves of the sea. Young person can be very unstable in that way. So what? It's just the way it is. You're going to have problems. You're going to make mistakes. Well, the wisdom literature is designed to compensate for the experience gap. And so Solomon is at a point in his life where he's done some living. We'll talk more about that. He's trying to pass on what he's learned. What he's learned. He's learned a lot. Yes, sir.
Are the Proverbs all absolutes, though?
That's a good question. They're not absolutes. And in the handout, I think the way I explained it is Proverbs are their general rules, a general principle that creates conditions that produce the best possible outcome. General principles that create conditions to produce the best possible outcome. And to make this point very simply, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And you can train up a child in the way he should go, and he departs from it. That doesn't mean that proverb is false. That means a child made decisions in spite of what he was taught. But as a parent, of course, what you're trying to do is what I just explained. To create conditions for the best possible outcome. Anything else about the purpose of wisdom literature? Oh.
What wisdom is and distinguish wisdom from knowledge.
Okay. Define what wisdom is and how is it different from knowledge? Knowledge is, what you have acquired. Knowledge is what you've learned. Wisdom is knowing what to do with what you know. Knowledge is, you can have the right answer. You can have the right answer and apply it in all the wrong ways. Husbands have experience in that, don't they? We can have the right answer, but not know how to, express it in the right ways. Wisdom is the experience to know how to use it. And that can be as simple as timing. It can be as simple as the tone of voice, the words you choose, how you would try to, not just say what's right, but to persuade someone of what's right. Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking wisdom is God's love to us. He cares for us, and then that's why He wants to instruct us, because He wants to keep us from hurting.
Yes, great point. And that gets to a lot of what Proverbs is about. And there are pitfalls in life that those who are experienced in life recognize, maybe have even fallen into on occasion. Well, just because there are pitfalls in life doesn't mean you've got to go headlong into one. Again, where I'm from in the Northeast, there are potholes in the road after the winter. And I don't like to drive in potholes. I don't know anyone that does. You try to avoid them. And that's what this father's trying to do for his son. He's trying. Here's the pitfall. Here's the temptation. You can avoid it. Some things can be avoidable. So Proverbs tells us in the opening lines what that book specifically is about. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing and righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance to understand a proverb and a saying, and the words of the wise and their riddles. It's expressed in a different way at the end of the book, in Proverbs 30 with Agur. And when you Agur, you say, well, who was this guy? Who he was really isn't the point. The point is who he represents. Agur represents the reader of Proverbs. And he says, I am weary. I am too stupid to be a man. You think, what kind of guy was he? The point is he's acknowledging he doesn't know anything, that he needs to learn. And he wants God to give him wisdom and how to be a man. And that's what Proverbs is all about, trying to explain. But I want us to think in the broadest possible framework, the broadest biblical framework as it relates to the purpose of the wisdom literature. And I would suggest to you that the purpose is to show us how to reflect the glory of God by the wise rule of the earth. To show us how to reflect the glory of God by the wise rule of the earth. And what I want to do is I want you to make connections between Solomon and who he was and his history with Israel and Adam in the garden. I don't try to do that with you here at this point. So when we think about God making humans, God making Adam and then making Eve, they're his image bearers in the world. They are intended to exercise stewardship, and in so doing, they are the light of the world, reflecting his glory. So we're all familiar with the account in Genesis. Adam is placed in a garden, and there are two distinctly different trees in the garden. What are the two trees? What's the good tree? The tree of life. And what's the bad tree? That's a little bigger. It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's why I just have two trees there. Two trees in the garden. One is about life and the other is about death. Well, Adam, as he is made, he begins serving the purpose for which he was created. In Genesis chapter 2, he does that. You find him very intently studying nature. I mean, if you're going to begin to do what Adam was charged to do, you've got to learn. And he's studying nature. And based upon what he's finding, what he's learning, he gives a name to the animals. That certainly is one of the ways that is showing us man's dominance over the natural world. You know, my parents named me. I didn't name myself. And the same is true of you, right? There is a dynamic between the child and their parents. So he is the one that's naming the animals. And those names, of course, if you get into taxonomy and that sort of thing, those names have reference to descriptions about an animal or a plant. After he does this, and I don't know how long this took. I can imagine this took quite some time to do. The conclusion he comes to is that there is nothing in the world like him. There is nothing in the world like him. He's alone. And God looks down and is stated it's not good for a man to be alone. So he gives him a helper, Eve, woman. And together they are able to share in the wise rule of the earth. And they did that. And again, I don't know how long they did that. I am inclined to think that it was probably for a good while. But something changed. Again, you know the story, the fall of Adam and Eve. When Adam and Eve, they took the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil into their own hands. They took it into their own hands. And everything fell apart. Everything changed in ways that they could not even begin to understand. And so we simply just describe it as the fall. It's the fall of man and woman, the fall of humans. It's the fall of creation, the natural world that Paul was writing about in Romans chapter 8. I explain all of that, so that's in the background. There are similarities. There are similarities between what went on with Adam and Eve and then what goes on later in time with Solomon and his rule over God's people in the world. So, let's think about wisely ruling the earth and how that is explained in the wisdom literature. So, Solomon, I would suggest to you, is a type, is a representation, is a symbol of Adam. And I know that's probably hard to make out. But there are similarities in what is described in Genesis 2 of what I just talked about, Adam studying the world, the natural world, and naming the animals. Similarities in that and what takes place with Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 4 and verses 29 to 34. You find Solomon rather, in his rule, he has been gifted wisdom by God and how he begins the wise rule of God's people in the earth. And he's studying, you learn about him studying nature. He's a biologist, he's a zoologist, and all of these other kinds of terms that we have in our culture. He's writing about it, studying it very intently. If you read in Ecclesiastes, for example, in chapter 2, you can learn about all of the different kinds of projects that he engaged in and his use of the natural world. And it says of the people, it says of God's people in that time that they ate and drank and were happy, that Judah and Israel lived in safety under his vine and fig tree. Isn't that an interesting way to explain what was happening in Israel during the rule of Solomon? The nation of Israel, ladies and gentlemen, was at its greatest point in its history during this period of time. When King Solomon wisely ruled over God's people, they were the light of the world. They were rightly and properly serving the purpose for which they had been made. Solomon is given wisdom. In the wisdom literature, it is significant. Again, you have got to pay attention to what is in the text, what is said. Often we want to jump to what it means and we skip over what it actually says, and we need to spend more time thinking about what it says before thinking about what it means. Wisdom is personified as a woman. The first time wisdom is mentioned in Proverbs 1 and verse 20, it's she, it's Lady Wisdom. In Proverbs 30, the virtuous woman, we're all familiar with that lady in Proverbs 30. It is interesting what is described there, that she is wisely ruling with her husband. She's wisely ruling with her husband, and as a result, they have a high standing reputation in the community. And not only that, there is wise rule going on in their family to the point that the children rise up and call their mother blessed. That's what Adam and Eve were supposed to do. The wisdom literature is showing us we can get back to fulfilling the original purpose for which we've been made. Now, like Adam and Eve, though, things changed for Solomon. Solomon becomes wise in his own eyes. Do you know that expression is used over and over and over again by way of warning in Proverbs? That expression is used over and over again by the prophets. Anytime you see people becoming wise in their own eyes, something bad's about to happen. Solomon, despite what he was told, despite what the law was, married wives of other nations. There was a reason why Israel was prohibited from intermarrying with the other nations, because of the influence that the other nations would have on God's people. And that's exactly what happens in Israel. We know the rest of the story of Israel. What comes as a result of Solomon taking wisdom into his own hands is division, chaos, brokenness. Israel as a nation is never the same after Solomon takes wisdom into his own hands. The point is that Solomon is telling us, is giving us lessons from his mistakes, telling us how to wisely rule the earth under the shade of the tree of life. Under the shade of the tree of life. And that's even language that is used. Now, I've said enough here. Let's think about the effects of wisdom and foolishness. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit already. What's to be gained through wisdom? Happiness. Pardon? How to live, okay. What about, oh, yes, ma'am. Guidance in decision making. Guidance in decision making. There's guardrails, there's boundaries that it establishes. You know, we can be involved in any number of situations that we've never been before, and you need a compass to show you the way forward. What about foolishness? What are the effects of foolishness? Okay, things to avoid. Destruction. Proverbs, that's one of the points that Proverbs makes is that, well, sin in our lives is self-destructive. It's not that it's something from the outside, it's what we do by our own making. Anything else about foolishness? Yes?
I have a question about
Sure.
wisdom in your own eyes. How do you protect yourself from going to the wise in your own eyes once you've gotten wisdom? How could Solomon have protected himself from that?
Yeah. Well, I think with Solomon, and one of the perils that we encounter in life is pride, and that is one of that's one of the basic issues in Genesis. Pride and the consequence of pride. We all are familiar with pride goes before destruction, getting to this point about how foolish choices that are made out of arrogance or I know better or it won't happen to me can bring a lot of heartache. So pride is a major factor. And Proverbs helps us to become more self-aware. And often we're not self-aware. And we can make a lot of mistakes because of that. Excellent point. Andy.
I was just having senior wise counselors in your life, which is what Proverbs indicates to us, is one of those very prudent protection mechanisms.
Yes, talking to people who have been there and who knows the consequence of a decision. Dennis.
One who is truly wise will humble himself before God. He knows
Yes, that's critical, that basic and fundamental, to recognize our own limitations. And Solomon doesn't do that. I suppose Solomon thought what God said would happen wouldn't, because after all, he was wise. But well, we know the rest of the story. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And, James tells us if anyone lacks wisdom, to go to God, to pray, and He will give us wisdom. And we all do that. At the same time, in terms of what we're talking about today, we need to remember that God already has given us wisdom in His Word. And if we're not reading and studying with a view to ourselves, then we're neglecting one of the greatest blessings God has given to us to help us in life.
Solomon answered his own question in verse in, I guess, 3:7. Solomon said, do not be wise in your own eyes. And you said, why? He said, fear the Lord and depart from evil. So he gives the answer.
Yes, that's great. He tells you why. He could go on and on about why, and the danger of it, the danger of pride. There's two passages here that help answer this question and connect this to what we were saying a moment ago about making a connection between the Garden of Eden and Solomon. In Proverbs 3 and verse 13, it says, blessed is the one who finds wisdom. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom. And then the text goes on to describe the value of wisdom and concludes in verse 18 saying, she is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. To those who hold her fast are called blessed. How would an Israelite have understood this? How would ancient eyes, ancient ears have perceived an expression like, she's a tree of life? Where would their minds have gone? Their minds would have made an immediate connection to the Garden of Eden. And what you find when Solomon is faithful, that he's ruling God's people under the shade of the tree of life. So this is a good text that helps support that framework that we were considering this morning. Now, just the opposite is described in relation to foolishness. In Proverbs chapter 24, it deals with the issue of laziness. And there's lots of very, very helpful and practical proverbs about laziness and the value of work. And what you find in the garden, of course, is that, well, Adam and Eve were made to work. They were made to work. I think we sometimes have this impression that Adam and Eve were just, sitting on lawn chairs sipping on lemonade. And that's not it at all. They were intended to use the earth as God gave it. But in Proverbs chapter 24 and verses 30 and 31, he says, I passed by the field of a sluggard, by the vineyard of a man lacking sense, and behold, it was all overgrown with thorns. The ground was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. Now you can just look at that in a very isolated way and come away with a very helpful piece of information, the value of hard work. And if you don't take care of your things, if you don't take care of your property, it's going to go to shambles. But that text, what is described there, is just the opposite. It's just the opposite of the Garden of Eden, isn't it? It will be overgrown with thorns. In Genesis 3, didn't God curse the ground? Thorns covered with nettles? The world changes. Their place in the world, it crumbles, it decays. Life now becomes hard. And after all, Proverbs tells us that the way of the transgressor is hard. Foolishness complicates our lives, layers our lives in ways that God never intended us to experience life in this world. But it's a very different picture Proverbs 24 describes than someone who is living under the shade of the tree of life. Do you have any reaction to that text? Again, when you slow down and pay attention to the illustrations that are given, I always try to think, how would the ones to whom this was originally written, how would they have understood this? And if we can answer that question, then we're getting closer to what the text actually means, and then how it would fit and apply to our lives. Anything else before we move on?
My thought would be that this has a spiritual application as well. What's my spiritual vineyard look like?
Yes.
Am I tending my spiritual vineyard, and am I neglecting it? And is it overgrown with thorns and covered with nettles, just like the seed that was,
Yes. Isn't it interesting?
rocky ground?
Yes. Isn't it interesting how the Bible begins in a garden and it ends in a garden? Isn't it interesting, all of the gardening references made by Jesus in his teaching? Why is that? Why is that? just random and coincidental? Of course not. There is a consistent theme that is through all of it. Yes, sir.
And keeping up with your spiritual life on a daily basis is a lot easier than going through the necessary cleanup when it's a disaster like.
Absolutely. And that's what I mean about how sin complicates our lives and dealing with the consequences of it. Adam and Eve's life was made difficult because of their choices. Solomon's life, Israel's life, I mean, again, you see it. That's not how God intended humans to live. Well, yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Yes, I also see a spiritual tie with these verses. Basically, somebody who has become lazy in their faith or stagnant. They stop growing, they stop trying, they stop serving. And when I see, and its stone wall was broken down, that's allowing things to creep into your life. Mm-hmm. And that talks a lot about boundaries, the spiritual boundaries that you have, that those hedges that keep you from falling and letting influences and people into your life. And it just becomes, if you see, it's just thorns and nasty, and it just becomes a big old mess.
Yes.
And you wonder how you got there.
Yes. Very, very good point. Very good point. I want to change gears for just a minute. Go ahead, Andy.
Before you leave that, practical application for us as Christians, one of the reasons you want to be involved in a local work, aka a member of a congregation, is this very thing, because the congregation is a part of helping you keep your garden tidied and in good shape. As a part of that, you must be engaged with the congregation. You must be engaged with other members. You must be engaged with your elders. Have a relationship with elders or senior folks that will tell you when your garden is dirty, and that you're going to be comfortable with them telling you your garden is dirty, okay, and you need to clean it up.
Yes.
That's, going back to the prior question of how do we keep ourselves from falling into the trap, wise in our eyes. And that's part of it. Be a part of the local work, be engaged, have relationships, and routinely test, is my garden clean?
Very good. Very good. Yes, it's not good for man to be alone. Not good for man to be alone. There's a reason why God has brought us together in a family, in a church. And to Andy's point, that's why, absolutely. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit. That's sort of the big picture of the wisdom literature and how it fits into the broader framework of the Bible, and basically, fundamentally, gets at us fulfilling the purpose for which we've been made. I want to mention very briefly some character types in Proverbs. There are character types that have to do particularly with the kind of unwise, the kind of foolish person. There's degrees of that you find in Proverbs. So first off, there is what Solomon describes as a simpleton. A simpleton. This is someone who is blissfully ignorant. Blissfully ignorant. Someone who is easily persuaded. You say that's someone without knowledge. That's someone without a foundation. And that they can be tricked. They can be taken advantage of. There are people like that in the world, and if you live like that in the world, some bad things are going to happen to you. And so the wisdom literature is trying to make us wise in the way of the world. We have to learn how the world functions. Jesus would say that we're to be as wise as serpents, harmless as doves. He wants us to be intelligent. We need to have a moral and ethical intelligence as we go through life. Kurt.
Choose your friends wisely.
Yes. Very good. Very good. The second character type in Proverbs is a fool. A fool is someone who is ignorant but thinks he's smart. Ignorant but thinks he's smart. Now we're starting to get dangerous. A fool, now it's becoming a little difficult to work with. Someone who's blissfully ignorant who's easily persuaded, well, then you can reason with that person. You can reason with that person. A fool, it starts to become difficult because they think they know something. Maybe they know better than you. Maybe they know better than what you can read in Proverbs. And then, most severely, there's the scoffer. Someone who is wise in worldly wisdom, but forcefully rejects God. Someone who is wise in worldly wisdom, but forcefully rejects God. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. That's someone who is boldly declaring, God isn't going to control my life. That's someone who lives in a perilous state of rebellion. Now, on the handout, a lot could be said about these character types. We're running out of time, and I want to get to my concluding point. I would suggest to you that these character types are helpful in child development and parenting. You can see how these character types manifest in the growth and development of a child. So if you think about, the toddler is a simpleton, blissfully ignorant. And as a parent, you're constantly trying to teach them how things work. Don't stick your finger in the light socket. I did that when it hurt so bad I could still remember doing it. Blissfully ignorant. The fool, that's, the preteen, the teenager, right? I mean, I sure thought I knew everything when I was a teenager, and I didn't. But parents, you have to work with that, right? And try to get, it's not easy. The scoffer, though, maybe we would call the scoffer the wayward child. The child who's come to some very clear conclusions in his own life and wants nothing whatsoever to do with what God made him to do. And so, what my goal as a parent, I have 2 boys. They're 11 and 8. Simpletons, but we're starting to get into the fool with the 11-year-old. As parents, what we want to do is prevent getting to the point where they're a scoffer.
Okay. I am here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. When I did this study, I don't know how many years ago, but there are 3 kinds of food. The first one is the Kesel, K-E-S-Y-L. That's the dull, stupid fool. The second one is the Ewil, E-W-I-Y-L. They're corrupt morally and they're perverted food. The third is the Nabal, N-A-B-A-L. This is the stubborn, brutish fool whose mind is made up. You cannot change them. They're ignorant and they lack spiritual desire.
Yes, very good. Other very good descriptions of the character types in Proverbs. I'm out of time. Know this, that wisdom is fulfilled in Christ. Proverbs is not self-help. The wisdom literature is not self-help, and that is often more broadly how we treat Christianity today. It's self-help. It's about having better character. It's about having better relationships. That will happen. But wisdom is fulfilled in Christ. It all points to Christ. That's what is stated in Colossians chapter 1. All wisdom and knowledge is kept in Christ. So, without Christ, we're fools. Again, we'll end where I began, trying to put the wisdom literature in the broadest possible biblical framework. You want to be wise, go to Christ, the one in whom all wisdom is fulfilled. Thank you so much for your participation. I've enjoyed this morning.